For thousands of years, the caste system in India has shaped how people see themselves and others. It's one of the oldest social hierarchies in human history, and also one of the most misunderstood. When most people think about the caste system, they imagine a simple pyramid, the priests at the top, the laborers at the bottom. But inside Hinduism, the ideas that support this system go much deeper. They're not just social, they're spiritual, cosmic, and moral. Some of them are so strange, they almost sound like mythology, dressed as social control. Today, we're going to explore 12 of those strange beliefs, the ones that have been used, consciously or not, to keep this hierarchy alive for thousands of years. The first strange belief is that caste is not social at all, it's divine. In Hindu scripture, the four main castes, or varnas, are said to come from the body of a cosmic being called Purusha. The priests, or Brahmins, came from his mouth, the warriors from his arms, the merchants from his thighs, and the laborers from his feet. This story might sound symbolic, but it was treated as literal truth. The idea was that society itself was designed by the gods, and if it's divine, it can't be questioned. The hierarchy becomes sacred, and obedience becomes a form of worship. The second belief takes it even further. It says that your birth in a certain caste is not random. It's the result of karma from your previous life. If you're born into a poor or low family, it's because you did something wrong in your past existence. The suffering you experience is seen as spiritual justice, and if you accept it quietly, you'll supposedly be reborn into a higher caste later. This belief doesn't just justify inequality, it glorifies it. It teaches that injustice is not really injustice, but a cosmic balance playing out. The third belief is that purity and pollution are not symbolic, but physical. The caste system divides people not only by status, but by what's considered clean or unclean. A Brahmin could lose his purity just by touching a lower caste person or eating food they prepared. These rules turned human contact into a kind of contamination. They created invisible walls between people, reinforced by fear and superstition. In some regions, Dalits, those outside the caste system, were forced to walk with a broom to sweep away their footprints, as if their very presence tainted the ground. The fourth belief is that every caste has its own sacred duty, called dharma, and that doing your duty, even if it's degrading, is better than doing someone else's. In the Bhagavad Gita, one of Hinduism's central texts, Krishna tells the warrior Arjuna that it's better to do your own duty badly than to do another's well. That line has been used for centuries to keep people in their assigned place. It teaches that rebellion against your social role isn't just disobedience, it's spiritual failure. The fifth belief says that knowledge itself should be restricted by caste. The Vedas, Hinduism's oldest scriptures, were traditionally reserved for the upper castes. Lower castes, especially Shudras and Dalits, were forbidden from even hearing them. In some texts, the punishment for a lower caste person who dared to recite the Vedas was pouring molten lead into their ears. This idea that divine knowledge belongs only to a select few created a monopoly on truth and turned learning into privilege instead of liberation. The sixth belief is that caste doesn't end with life. It follows the soul through endless rebirths. In this view, life is an ongoing exam, and your current suffering is the result of past failure. It's a perfect system for social control. No matter how unfair your situation, it's your fault, and your only hope is obedience. It turns oppression into self-blame and replaces human justice with spiritual accounting. The seventh belief is about women. In caste ideology, a woman's caste purity was considered fragile. A marriage to a man of lower caste could pollute not just her, but her entire family line. That's why intercaste marriage was, and still is, treated like a moral crime. This obsession with bloodline purity mirrors the logic of racism elsewhere in the world. But here, it's justified through spirituality. It's not just about ancestry, it's about karma, dharma, and cosmic order. The eighth belief is that caste is eternal. Hindu scriptures often describe social hierarchy as part of the eternal law of the universe, sanatana dharma, meaning it was, it is, and it always will be. That idea made reform almost impossible. Even when people wanted to challenge it, they were told that fighting caste was fighting against nature itself. The system was built to defend itself from within. The ninth belief is that even the gods have castes. In some temple traditions, certain deities are worshipped by specific castes, and others are considered too low to even enter a temple. It's as if divinity itself is segregated. When gods are assigned social status, it teaches people to see inequality as natural, not human-made. It turns hierarchy into theology. The 10th belief is that breaking caste rules brings not only social shame, but spiritual danger. Ancient texts describe people who defy their caste duties as being reborn as animals or outcasts. Fear of spiritual punishment was far more effective than any law. It made people police themselves, even when no one was watching. Religion didn't need force, it only needed fear. The 11th belief is one that often goes unnoticed, the idea that the oppressed should never envy the privileged because everyone has their place in the cosmic order. It's a subtle form of moral manipulation. Instead of asking why injustice exists, people are told to find peace in it. Acceptance becomes a virtue, and questioning becomes sin. And finally, the 12th belief, that the caste system is not man-made but natural, like rivers or mountains. That's what makes it so powerful. When inequality is treated as nature itself, it no longer feels cruel, it feels inevitable. And once people accept inequality as inevitable, it stops being seen as wrong. What's fascinating and disturbing is how these beliefs have survived even outside religion. Many people who don't think of themselves as religious still follow caste practices in marriage, status, and social behavior. It's no longer justified with scripture, but with culture, family, or tradition, yet the structure remains the same. Some say the caste system was never meant to be rigid, that it was corrupted over time. But the texts themselves are clear. They glorify hierarchy and obedience. They reward submission and stigmatize equality. Whether it was meant as a metaphor or not doesn't change how it has shaped real lives. Even today, caste discrimination shows up in schools, in workplaces, in housing, and especially in marriage. People may not talk about it openly, but it's still there, an ancient code that never fully died. What makes it so resilient is that it hides behind spiritual language. It doesn't say, some people are better than others. It says everyone has their role. It doesn't say, you deserve your suffering. It says, you're learning from it. It disguises control as harmony and inequality as order. When you look at it closely, the caste system isn't just a social structure, it's a psychological one. It shapes how people think, how they justify things, how they see justice and morality. It turns an accident of birth into destiny, and destiny into a moral code. And that's the strange part. These ideas survive not because they make sense, but because they give meaning. They offer simple answers to complex realities. They tell people that the world is fair, even when it isn't. But when we start to question them, when we stop treating hierarchy as sacred, we begin to see that these beliefs aren't spiritual truths at all. They're human inventions, built to serve power, not truth. The caste system endures not because it's divine, but because it's useful to those who benefit from it. And as long as people believe it's backed by cosmic law, it will keep disguising inequality as destiny. Understanding that is the first step to seeing through it. Because once you realize that the universe doesn't assign rank, people do, the entire illusion begins to fall apart. And when it does, you start to see that the real path to wisdom, justice, and humanity isn't found in hierarchy at all, but in equality. The one thing the caste system could never tolerate. The more you explore it, the more you realize how deeply this logic runs, not only in religion, but in the subconscious of an entire culture. It's not just about who can marry whom, or who can touch whose food. It's about how people are trained to see value and where they believe worth comes from. For centuries, birth has been treated as destiny, not just in India, but in many societies. Yet in Hindu caste belief, that idea was spiritualized, made sacred, and woven into every part of life. From prayer to marriage to the way people greet each other, every gesture quietly reinforces the idea that people are not equal. Even education, one of the supposed engines of progress, was built to protect this order. The ancient gurukulas, the teachers' schools, were often closed to lower castes. Those who weren't allowed to learn were called avarna, meaning without color, outside the fourfold system entirely. The irony is painful. A culture that produced profound philosophical insights about the nature of reality also built a system that denied reality to millions of people. Over time, many reformers within India tried to challenge this, from Buddha, who rejected caste altogether, to later social thinkers like Basava, Kabir, and Ambedkar. Each tried to pull the moral rug out from under the system by pointing out its contradictions. Buddha said that a person's worth depends on their actions, not their birth. Ambedkar, himself born a Dalit, went further, calling Hinduism's caste system a system of graded inequality. He argued that as long as people accepted Hindu scriptures as sacred, caste could never truly die. And history has proven him right. Even today, when laws forbid caste discrimination, the mindset continues quietly. It moves into new forms: social status, last names, family networks, politics. It adapts, because it was never just about religion, it was about power. One of the strangest consequences of the caste system is that even those at the bottom often defend it, not because it benefits them, but because it gives them a framework for meaning. It tells them who they are, where they fit, and what to expect from life. That's how powerful belief can be. It can turn suffering into purpose, submission into virtue. Some sociologists call this internalized hierarchy, when people start believing the system that oppresses them is somehow necessary. It's a kind of psychological colonization that happens slowly over generations. Children grow up hearing that humility is sacred, obedience is good, and rebellion is sin. Over time, questioning becomes unthinkable, and yet something remarkable has happened in recent decades. With urbanization, migration, education and technology, people have begun to see beyond these invisible walls. Many are starting to recognize that the hierarchy they were told was eternal isn't eternal at all. When you take away the idea of divine justice, when you stop believing that someone's suffering is a result of past karma, the whole foundation shakes. Suddenly, you can ask new questions. If there's no cosmic reason for inequality, then who benefits from it? Who created it? Who keeps it alive? Once those questions are asked, the system loses its spiritual armor. It stops being sacred and starts looking like what it always was, a structure designed by humans, maintained by fear, and justified by myth. There's also a fascinating psychological layer to all this. Beliefs about purity, karma, and duty satisfy a deep human desire for order. People want to believe that the world makes sense, that everything happens for a reason. The caste system offers that illusion of order. Every person in their place, every event has a moral consequence. It's comforting, even if it's cruel. That's why such beliefs are hard to let go. They don't just control behavior, they soothe anxiety. They make chaos look like balance. Even injustice becomes bearable if you think it's part of a divine plan. But when you let go of that illusion, something else appears in its place: accountability. If there's no divine plan balancing good and evil, then it's up to us to create justice, not through prayer, but through action. That shift from divine order to human responsibility is what frightens traditional systems the most, because it hands power back to people. And that's exactly what makes the critique of the caste system so threatening. It's not just a social challenge, it's a philosophical one. It questions whether moral order comes from the universe or from human reason. If morality isn't written in the stars, then we are the ones who write it. And if we are the ones who write it, then we can also rewrite it. That's why even now in the 21st century, many defenders of the old order still reach for religion. They know that as soon as people stop believing that inequality is divine, they'll see it for what it is: human-made, fragile, and reversible. And that realization is powerful. It's the moment when people start treating one another not as upper or lower, not as pure or impure, but simply as human. Once that happens, the 12 strange beliefs begin to collapse on their own. The idea of divine hierarchy loses meaning. The notion of karmic punishment becomes absurd. Purity loses its moral shine, and what's left is something raw and honest. The recognition that human value doesn't come from birth, but from being alive. It's almost poetic. The very system that tried to make people unequal ends up proving how deeply equality is needed. Because every time caste tries to divide people, something inhuman, nature resists, something that refuses to accept that worth can be ranked. Throughout history, every reformer, every skeptic, every dissenter who questioned caste has carried that spark. They saw through the illusion and said, "No cosmic law decides your place, you do." And maybe that's the real revolution, not just in India, but in every culture that has ever used faith to justify hierarchy. The revolution of seeing the world as it is, not as some sacred order demands it to be. The strange beliefs that built the caste system were powerful, but not permanent. They served their purpose for those who benefited, but like all human constructs, they can be unmade, because truth doesn't require hierarchy, and justice doesn't need divinity. It just needs clarity, compassion, and the courage to see through the stories that once held the world together. And when that courage spreads, when people stop mistaking tradition for truth, the old order finally begins to dissolve. The strange beliefs lose their spell, and for the first time in a long time, humanity steps out of the shadow of its own creation. There's a quiet moment that comes after all the explanations fade, when the mind stops trying to justify the past and starts seeing it for what it is. In that moment, you can almost feel the weight of centuries lifting. The rules, the labels, the invisible lines, all of it built on stories people stopped questioning long ago. The truth is, no society can move forward while carrying a belief that some lives are worth more than others. And yet that's exactly what the caste system has done. It hid inequality under the language of spirituality. It dressed hierarchy as harmony. It told people that submission was virtue and equality was sin. But every generation produces its questioners, people who look at those old beliefs and feel something doesn't add up. They may not always call themselves reformers or philosophers or rebels, but they all share one thing. They don't mistake inheritance for truth. Throughout history, small acts of defiance have chipped away at this system. A teacher allowing a student from a lower caste into their class, a couple daring to marry across caste lines, a village refusing to segregate water wells. These may seem small, but they strike directly at the heart of the old order, because every time someone breaks a caste rule, and nothing terrible happens, the myth loses power. And that's how belief systems collapse, not through confrontation, but through exposure, through ordinary people proving that the world doesn't fall apart when you treat others as equals. It's strange how fear works. For so long, people believed the universe itself would punish them for crossing caste lines. But when they finally did, they discovered that the only punishment came from other people, not from gods, not from karma, just from those afraid of losing control. Once that realization spreads, something shifts. The authority of divine order loses its grip. The sacred stories start to sound like what they always were, stories. But the mind resists that kind of change, because belief is not just intellectual, it's emotional. The caste system wasn't just about who did what. It shaped how people saw themselves. When you've been told your entire life that your identity is sacred, even if it confines you, it's hard to let it go. It feels like losing a piece of yourself. That's why real freedom from the caste mindset doesn't come from rejecting others. It comes from redefining yourself. When you no longer see your worth as something given by birth or blessed by gods, you start to see it as something you create. That shift changes everything. Suddenly, morality isn't about obeying rules, it's about empathy. Responsibility isn't about following divine duty, it's about choosing what kind of person you want to be. In that light, the 12 strange beliefs aren't just outdated ideas, they're obstacles to human maturity. They keep people trapped in an old psychological pattern where guilt, fear, and obedience replace understanding, compassion, and curiosity. When those beliefs fall away, what's left isn't emptiness, it's possibility. The freedom to think without inherited guilt, to connect without inherited fear, to live without inherited hierarchy. And maybe that's why these conversations still matter, because they're not just about history or religion, but they're about how humans build systems of meaning, and how those systems, if left unexamined, start to control us. The caste system, at its core, is a mirror showing how far people will go to find certainty, even if that certainty costs them their freedom. But the moment we stop seeking divine approval for inequality, the moment we start asking if our moral compass needs gods at all, that's when humanity begins to grow up. Because what's more sacred than the truth that every human being, regardless of birth or belief, has the same capacity for thought, compassion, and change? It's a quiet truth, not dramatic, not mystical, but deeply human. And maybe that's enough. When you strip away the ancient rituals, the karma charts, and the stories of cosmic justice, all that remains is the simple reality that fairness doesn't need religion, equality doesn't need scripture, and kindness doesn't need permission. That's what makes these beliefs so strange when viewed today. They tried to turn spirituality into a caste, morality into inheritance, and justice into destiny. But the world doesn't work that way anymore. Every person born today has the chance to see through those illusions faster than any generation before them. Education, information, and connection have made it harder for systems of hierarchy to survive. They thrive on ignorance, but the modern world is running out of places to hide it. Still, the shadows remain. People cling to the old structure, sometimes not because they believe it's right, but because they fear the alternative. Equality is a heavy responsibility. It means no one is chosen, no one is destined, no one has a divine reason to rule. It means we're all accountable to the same standard: reason, empathy, and fairness. And that's what makes this such a profound turning point. For the first time, millions of people are realizing that they don't need sacred stories to live decent lives. They don't need fear to act with compassion. They don't need divine reward to seek justice. They just need the courage to question, and the honesty to follow where that questioning leads. Because when questioning begins, belief without evidence starts to fade, and the strange ideas that once seemed eternal begin to look fragile. Maybe that's how every great illusion ends, not with rebellion or violence, but with understanding. The moment enough people see that the emperor has no clothes, the spell breaks, and that's where the hope lies, not in divine intervention, but in awareness, in education, in human empathy. The caste system, like many ancient hierarchies, is a story written by humans trying to explain their world. Now it's time to write a new one where no child is born with stigma, no worker carries invisible shame, and no person is told that the universe itself ranked them lower, because the universe doesn't rank anyone, it just exists, and it leaves the rest to us. Maybe that's the question that hangs in the air after everything else fades, not whether the caste system is right or wrong, that's obvious, but why so many people still defend it, why people cling to a structure that limits them, divides them, and teaches them to see others as less human. The answer, perhaps, is comfort. It's easier to believe you were born into your place than to face the chaos of freedom, because freedom means responsibility. It means creating your own meaning, not inheriting one. The caste system offered certainty, a neat, ordered universe where everyone had a role and no one had to ask why. But life isn't neat, and meaning isn't assigned, it's made. That's what makes questioning so powerful. It doesn't destroy meaning, it frees it. It allows people to build identity not from what they're told they are, but from who they choose to be. Throughout history, there's been a quiet war between two ways of seeing the world. One says that people are born into hierarchy, that the universe is fixed, and our job is to obey it. The other says that people are born equal. That meaning comes from our actions, not our ancestry. Every step humanity takes forward, in science, in rights, in reason, has been a victory for the second view, and a defeat for the first. Because the moment you start thinking freely, you realize something simple yet radical. There's no cosmic reason anyone should serve or suffer, no spiritual logic behind inequality, no invisible hand that sorts people into classes and castes. There are only humans, imperfect, curious, capable of cruelty, capable of kindness, and the systems they build to make sense of a confusing world. The tragedy of the caste system isn't just that it oppressed millions, it's that it convinced people that oppression was sacred, that submission was virtue, that obedience was enlightenment. And maybe the strangest belief of all is the one that still lingers, the idea that dismantling hierarchy somehow destroys culture. It doesn't. It just removes the illusion that cruelty and tradition are the same thing. Culture doesn't die when people become equal. It evolves. It becomes more honest, more human. In that way, questioning the caste system isn't an attack on heritage, it's a defense of humanity. It's a reminder that progress isn't about forgetting where we came from, but refusing to be trapped there. Because what's sacred about a world that divides people by birth? What's divine about telling a child that their worth is already decided before they've lived a single day? When those questions start echoing loud enough, the silence that once protected the system begins to break, and in that silence, new voices emerge. Voices that say, equality isn't a dream, it's a responsibility. That fairness doesn't need the approval of gods. It only needs the will of people. And that's where the story can change, not in ancient texts or temples, but in minds willing to see the truth beneath the rituals. Because the most powerful act of liberation isn't rebellion, it's clarity. It's the moment you stop seeing hierarchy as destiny and start seeing it as a choice. And from that moment on, everything is different. No one can make you feel impure. No one can convince you that the universe chose your suffering. No one can tell you you're less, because the walls of caste, like all walls built on belief, exist only for as long as people agree to stay inside them. And the moment you realize you can walk out, they crumble, quietly, completely, and forever. Maybe that's how this story ends. Not with anger or revenge, but with awareness, with people simply refusing to bow to illusions. And maybe that's how all strange beliefs finally disappear, not when they're defeated, but when they're no longer believed. Because truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to be seen. And once it's seen, once people understand that no one is born higher or lower, that worth isn't inherited, and dignity isn't granted, then the old system, no matter how ancient or sacred, has nowhere left to hide. The moment you stop believing that inequality is holy, you make equality inevitable.